This is module 5, summarizing data graphical presentation, and this is the section number 3, multivariate and specialist graph types. The term multivariate refers that we are taking more than one variable at a time, so that to know is there any association or correlation between these two variables. So, an example is change in happiness levels plotted with change in the income, that is one example of a multivariate graph. So, the types of multivariate graphs are XY scatter or the dot plots, bubble charts, radar plots, 3D surface plots, contour plots, heat maps, and so on. There are multiple forms of multivariate graphs are available. XY scatter plot is a very simple example of a multivariate analysis. So, this is to plot two numeric data, two numeric variables into the graph, so against each other. So, whether for example, happiness level and income is related or not, or the smoking level of smoking and the incidence of the lung cancer, is it actually related or not. So, in order to find any correlation or association, that is the reason why we are doing this kind of graph. So, it can also add a trend line or best fit line at the least distance, or the distance has to minimize the sum of squares. So, we will see that in the regression module that is coming up later. So, this best fit line is nothing but regression line, or it is a model fitting. Many of these XY plot will have one line in it, that is the regression line. So, how to plot it, what is the rationale behind this regression line and all, we will discuss that when we discuss about the regression. So, XY scatter is very simple, it is actually X and Y, and each value you are simply plotting as a dot. So, if there is a correlation between these two values, you will be getting a kind of a line. So, as one value increases, the second value will also increase. So, in that case, these dots will more or less forms a line. So, that is what the correlation is all about. XYZ plot also you can do that instead of two dimension, that is X and Y, you can go for the third dimension as well with the Z. So, this is a Cartesian coordinate system. It is very simple to draw it in the Z axis, because you first go through the X, then Y, then Z in both ways. So, that is how we are actually placing it. You can imagine the XYZ Cartesian coordinate system like the corner of your room. So, if you look at a corner of your room, then you can see that there will be three lines intersecting at the corner. So, you can mark one line as X, another as Y, and the third as Z. Then you can plot any point in this three dimensional space if you know these three values, which is X, Y, and Z coordinates. So, you can do the 3D scatter plot, just like XY scatter plot, you can go for XYZ scatter plot, that is called 3D scatter plot, that can see the correlation between three variables. So, all the ways. So, X versus Y, X versus Z, Y versus Z. So, all the permutations and combinations you can see that way. Bubble graph is yet another intuitive way. So, it actually conveys that dots are there and bubbles can have its own size. The size can be drawn proportional to another variable, and the color can also it can be color coded. So, the color can also represent another variable. For example, the intensity setting, the level setting of a factor could be the color. So, multiple variants can be presented in one go through the bubble. It is an example of a hybrid chart form. Another example is 3D surface plot of an agricultural yield. So, you have got three things, for example, humidity and temperature and the yield. So, how the yield changes with the humidity and temperature. So, or this one, the rain intensity and temperature, how the yield changes. So, all these things you can effectively plot in a three dimensional way in a 3D surface plot. So, it's basically it's like a surface, the topography is drawn in such a way that you can spot local the peaks. So, these peaks correspond to actually the locations where the quantity is quite high, or the correlation is quite high. So, 3D surface plots are quite commonly used in biological sciences, so as the surface graphs. So, there are surface graphs are usually it's two dimensional, while 3D surface plots are three dimensional. So, surface graphs are two-dimensional representation of the three-dimensional space. So, instead of plotting in a three-dimension, which is quite complicated, for example, a topography of a mountain. So, you can simply plot that the same topography in a two-dimensional way. The so-called contour graphs are example of the surface graph. So, contour graphs, the curve along which the function has the constant value. So that the curve joins points of the equal value. You might have seen that in maps of hilly terrain. You can see certain lines passing through. So these lines means that it could be anything. So the contour is usually the same elevation lines, the contour. While there are so many other kinds of contour graphs are available, as you can see it on the screen. Another interesting way to to visualize the data is through heat map. So heat maps are actually drawn in such a way that actually this heat map is the output of a microarray data analysis. So microarray is a technique through which you can quantify the expression of the genes. So expression levels of each gene is color coded in this heat map. So for example, the red one means overexpressed while blue one means underexpressed, or vice versa. It all depends upon, you have to carefully read the legends of the heat maps. And you can also see that this heat map also have got a cladogram on the top as well as on the side. So this cladogram is another kind of a graph. So cladogram will join together, the clusters are identified, groups of genes that are expressed together or expressed in same level. So that is what these cladograms convey. There are several specialist chart types as well. For example, Grantt chart and phylogenetic tree. The tree which you just saw is phonetic tree, but it can be a cladistic tree as well, so called the phylogenetic tree. Grantt chart, also known as sometimes it's called PERT chart. So these are for the project management and to convey the progress in a project. So usually it has got a top line indicating months or years, and each value will be on the first column, will be different pertinent features of your project or the grant. And these bars represent the period at which you are envisioned to do that kind of activities as part of your project. So this PERT chart or the Grantt chart, you can use it for proposal writing for a research grant, or also you can use this one for a PhD thesis. If you are planning to to do the PhD, so you would need a synopsis. So for synopsis, you can use this PERT chart or the Grantt chart to say that from which month to which month what will you do. So there is more organized way to present your data. So it's very informative. Phylogenetic tree is yet another kind of a specialist graph, because that is actually summarizing a lot of information. It's a visual summary of a multiple sequence alignment containing billions of data sets. So big trees like this. So these phylogenetic trees trace the evolutionary legacy of the group of species most commonly used. So these species that it's actually evolution is conveyed by a tree. So for example, two species, are they actually closely related or not? So remember that in biology, relatedness means not just the morphological similarity, but relatedness by means of common ancestry. That is what the genealogical relatedness is. That is what exactly the phylogenetic tree conveys. So in summary, the term multivariate refers to the fact that the investigator considers more than one variable at one time to see possible correlation or association between them. Some common types of multivariate graphs are XY scatter plot, also known as dot plots, bubble charts, radar plots, web chart or spider plots or star plots. All these are different terms for the same radar plots, 3D surface plots, contour plots and heat maps. Two specialist graph types often used in biology are Grantt chart or PERT chart and phylogenetic tree. Hope you have enjoyed this video, and please actively contribute in the discussion forums, because discussion forums are the backbone of any MOOC. I will see you in the next module. Thank you.